Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Good to see you, Daniel.
Good to see you, Dr. Paul.
I want to talk about inflation. The country's always talking about inflation. Austrian economists always talk about inflation. They try to get the right definition out, but they generally don't. You can have inflation of the money supply, but government agents always talk about increasing prices. Anyway, I'm going to talk about the release today from the Labor Department about the PPI. And for June, it went up 0.4%. And on top of a 0.5% in May. So if you put those together, prices are currently going up at 6% a year. And of course, this is sort of what the Fed prays for. Oh, everything's going to be okay if we can get prices going up 2%, as if that's going to help the consumer. But anyway, that's their goal. And my point that I'd like to make on this is, yes, I think prices are going up, but I think they will come to a point where they're not going to be happy with this price inflation that they're seeing, because they don't think that it will ever occur again, and they don't think about it, that you can have inflationary depressions like Zimbabwe, where you have runaway inflation and deep depression. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're on the verge of that, but you also can have subtle, steady, harmful inflation that is in the middle of a recession. And this puts, I think, the Fed in a box. And one thing that I think the Fed is in trouble with is they claim, Yellen's been saying, we're going to raise them maybe 2 times this year and things are going well, and they're talking themselves into a healthy economy, although they fudge all these figures, all the employment figures, and also, so they're talking about raising these interest rates. But you can see, what might happen if the inflation is 2, 3, or 4%. That will make them put dampers on increasing rates, because that's when they're supposed to back off. And also, in the midst of a recession, that's also a reason why they can't raise interest rates. So I've sort of argued that I don't expect the Fed, to raise the interest rates, but time will tell.
I think we heard even, I saw something on Zero Hedge today from Janet Yellen, and she seemed to be hedging the terms a little bit. She was much more emphatic earlier this year about raising the rates, and now she said something like, if things keep going according to projections or something.
Oh, they always cover themselves, and they work hard at preparing the markets. They believe now that they prepared the markets well enough for a little increase in interest rates, which, in theory, a fraction increase in the interest rate shouldn't hurt anything. But the real evil here is the fact that they talk about, what's the Fed going to do? What does the Fed know? How much should it raise it? That's where the real problem is, as if they knew. But it has a lot of effect because everybody's watching it and they're going to react to it, and they don't know what it is, but they never are open to the suggestion, well, maybe the market rate of interest is important, and the market rate of interest is a price, and of course prices, if you don't have prices, guess what you have? Socialism, and then you have shortages and all the problems of the world. So.
We talked just a little while ago, a few days ago, about the improving labor market, and everything sounded great, and then we put on that chart that showed participation in the labor force.
Yeah, down to 63% now, worse than ever, and they just don't count the people who are part-time workers. Full-time workers, that chart we showed also revealed that full-time employment was getting much, much worse, and yet they're saying, well, it's coming along, it looks like we're getting strong. But the other thing that the Fed is facing up to is that the Bernankes and the Yellens of the world, their expertise is in depression, studying the Great Depression, but they didn't read Murray Rothbard's The Great Depression and understand how the Fed messed up in the 20s with the Republicans, and then they came in and there was a predictable crash, but their whole idea, including the monetarists, accepted this. In 1937, some people think we're near 1937, things look like they're improving a little bit, interest rates are way below market, nothing like they are today. So why don't we start bumping up the interest rates? They did that, and then the economy promptly crashed. I think it was, it hadn't recovered. And I think that's where they are today, and psychologically, it could be very harmful. They know that. But the worst scenario for the Fed would be that they have to acknowledge that prices are going up, and that 2% is ridiculous. I think when they finally get that 2% and it's 4%, they're going to be all this time hoping and praying for inflation. They're going to be unhappy with it. But then they're going to have a weak economy and loss of confidence, and then there'll be some type of an emergency. Yellen, in her testimony today, recognized that Greece and China are problems. And Mark Faber, I mentioned the other day, he actually claims that China is the big deal. Greece isn't. Greece is small, and the euro, as big as it is, he still put more emphasis on China. She's starting to recognize that. So you can see if the Chinese economy topples and really goes down and worse than they claim it is, along with these problems, I don't think the Fed, no matter how well intended they are, and I'm sure they're well intended. They think they're smart. And they think they're smarter than the market. And interest rates, that's old fashioned. Well, I think what is old fashioned is dictatorships and money control and governments and control banking and interest rate. And in recent years, it's been central banking. The last 100 years, it's been universal central banking with a currency. None of them are backed. And of course, it's all based on the value of the dollar. So I'm not yet optimistic about what's going on, other than the fact that there's so much information out there that people are becoming skeptical of what's happening. And I think if they look at history, not just at this silliness of 1937 interest rate rise, but looking at history and finding out that central economic planning in the business cycle comes from a very precise source, and that is the Federal Reserve System and the central banks, whether it's our central banks or the European central banks, but all of these produce a problem. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and I am concerned that the Fed has no control whatsoever, and no matter what they do, it's going to make things worse. They can't control the rate of price increases. They can control the rate of monetary inflation, how many new dollars, but that's totally out of control. It's just not been discounted by the marketplace. So today we see that the PPI is going up, retail sales are going down. I believe once we get this price inflation that the Fed has worked so hard to get, because that would be a sign of strength in the economy, we'll find out that prices rising in a weak economy is a disaster, and will put the Fed between the rock and the hard place, and they won't have any idea what to do, and they will not consider the only answer, and that is get out of the way and let the market determine what the interest rates ought to be. Just provide a sound currency for us. That would solve a lot of our problems and avoid us turning into Greece. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.